I received lots of comments or questions about the word impasto or impasto as a technique. One in particular says, how does one go about achieving an impasto effect in their paintings? And this person also asked what mediums or paints are used. Those are good questions. And then one last question here, is it one of the last marks to the canvas, or could you glaze over it when it's dried? So those are really, really good questions. Let's take a look at how we might answer them. Impasto means textured paint. We know Van Gogh to use highly textured paint in his paintings. But the question was about how do we do that? What kind of paint we use? Well, in Van Gogh's day, the paint was very, very stiff when it was manufactured. It was just beginning to be manufactured then. It was very, very stiff, and so it made getting textures really, really easy. Today, most paints are made more creamy, and that means that we might have to add a little something to it to get that texture. So let's start there. And then I want to do just a quick little demo for you to show you about using or achieving these textures. But first, let's start with how do you get the texture? Well, as I said before, you can look on my palette here and you can see the texture in these little piles of paint. And so that means that we have enough texture here that we could build a really high texture using just these paints. And that's Charlie you hear in the background. Charlie's become very popular, but when he loses his acorn, he raises Cain, and that's exactly what has happened. So we're just going to ignore Charlie and go forward. Now back to the texture thing. So if I was looking at doing a textured or impasto painting of this rooster, then I might look at in the green area there, and I could do that in three ways actually. I could come to that with a straight paint, and let's look right in here where that shadow area would be, and you see that thick texture, and I don't know if the camera really shows that thick texture. We can emphasize the texture and show it more if we add a little variety in value to it. So looking under here at the cast shadow underneath that rooster, you can see that if you put a little addition in value or a little variation in value, you can show that thick texture. Now you can do that with a palette knife, or you can do it with a brush. So that's one way. But if you get really, really, really thick impasto, meaning heavy texture, I'll pile some more paint. You see that very, very highly textured. Then that's going to take lots of paint, and that can be very expensive. There's another way that we can do that and not have to use quite so much paint, and that is by adding to it a medium that's formulated in order to give us that texture. Now there are several of those kinds on the market, and this was an answer to another part of the question that I just read to you. But one of my favorites is Cold Wax Medium by Gamblin. There's also a wax medium called the Dorland's Wax Medium. Either one of those. As a wax medium, you don't have strong odors, and that's one thing that a lot of people can't tolerate. There's another Gamblin material made for creating impasto, and that is the Gamblin Galca Gel, but it has kind of a strong odor to it. The only downside of the wax medium is it does create a highly matte surface. But if you wanted your paintings to be more glossy, you could add back into them one of the glossy mediums, and that adds the gloss back in. Now, as to how to use it, well, here's my favorite way. Now, this medium, this wax medium, cold wax medium, can have added to it other things such as a solvent. We could add the Gamsol to that and get it thinner if we wanted it thinner. I'm going to pull it down the palette just like this, and I'll show you why in just a moment. But we could get it thinner if we wanted to, and as I said before, you can add almost any oil solvent oil-based medium to it, and it's compatible. So it's very versatile, especially if you want highly textured impasto brush strokes or palette knife strokes on your painting. Now let me show you. I'm going to stay in this area right here, and I'm going to go back into this mixture. Come right here. You see, it won't take very much. Now just go right in here and pull just a little bit of that the cold wax medium, and mix it in thoroughly. Now you don't want much, because if you mix, now you can see that if I put the proportion of this to that, if it's too much of the wax, it begins to turn cloudy, and you lose that wonderful rich transparency. So I can add back to that, and this time let's go with a brush, and I can just pick that up with the brush and go back right over here, extend that shadow with brush strokes like that. Let's go up to a lighter value. Pull a little bit of the Dorlands into that. I keep calling it Dorlands. It's because Dorlands was available for many years before the Gamblin formula was available, and so it's kind of stuck in my head. But it's really called cold wax medium, so maybe I can just say wax. All right, and you see now, let's go in a little bit more into the lighter values and get the variation. And you can see now, you can see that texture that's built up there in that shadow area. You don't want to overstroke too when you're working with textures or building impastos. If you overstroke, you're going to lose the actual feeling of texture. Now I'm adding a little blue in here, and now you can begin to really see that texture. Now I'll build just a little bit more. My purpose doing this is not necessarily to create a painting of the rooster, but it's to show you how we can use mixtures of this wax medium and paint in order to achieve an impasto painting. So I always like to start in the shadows and build forward. So I'm going to go into the shadow area of that rooster. I'll pick up some paint in the brush, I'll pull it right over here. See, that needs to be a little darker, so I'm going to add a little ultramarine blue, not mix it very much. Because one of the beauties of impasto painting is that the mixing gets done more on the canvas than on the palette. So you can see the reason I pull this in a line here is it allows me then to move into another area, put a little bit of the wax in there, just sort of mix that wax in with the paint. Now let's go in here and let's just kind of stroke, and we can stroke again and stroke again, go right up into the rooster's underneath the rooster's breast area, stroke again, put a little bit more of the mixture in there, get a little bit more variation in, get a little bit of that ultramarine blue in that mixture, and let's go right here, stroke, stroke, more paint. Now you can get it as thick as you want it. You can really build that up with the brush. Just move in here and get a little bit more of the medium. Let's see just how thick we can get it. I have a tendency when I'm in my in my work, I have a tendency to paint thinner without all the texture. So when I'm doing this, I have a tendency to paint that just a little bit thinner than you can see. Now let's get some variation in there. Now I'm going to move up. Let's put some white down here. Pull just a little bit of white down. Charlie is really giving us a show, isn't he? We had a talk before we started filming, but it didn't seem to take. All right, here we go. More of that texture. You see that texture feeling there. Move more into the wax medium, the cold wax. Pull a little bit more, and you can see how I'm working that into the brush. Let's give it more texture. I'm going into the darker part there. And also the brush strokes. Now, when you're building impasto painting, the brush strokes mean an awful lot. So if in a situation like this, the brush stroke needs to fall in the direction of the subject. So this wing falling this way, that means the brush stroke needs to go that way in order for the texture to help define the brush stroke. So I'm going to pull a little bit more of this, go right up in here, pick up a little bit more of the medium, get it thicker, thinner, whatever I want. Now I see a little bit of a redder portion here, so I'll just come down like that, like that. It's a little bit lighter. Let's pick up a little bit of the white in there, kind of lighten it up just a little bit more of the medium, a little bit more of the medium, and stroke downward. And let's see what else we see. Now we see it getting a little bit lighter, so I'll go into my lighter version of my paint here with the paint first, allowing the paint to build up on the brush. A little bit more of, and here you're just controlling the color and the value according the same way you would in doing normal or doing any painting, where you're not concerned necessarily with building an impasto painting. The quicker the stroke, I found, the more lively the stroke, the better and more effective it is. And you notice what I try to do is to look at the image and then decide how the brush stroke should go and then pull it. The other thing is that what you might notice is that in order to make the stroke go on more textured, you want to not push really hard. Well, I'll show you. Let's get this mixture just a little bit, get that just a little bit lighter right in there, and let's go right up in here. Now this falls in this direction, this direction, this direction, this direction. Let's give it a little bit more variation there, a little bit more of that variation. You see that the paint gets muddier quicker when you're working impasto than when you're working, shall I say, non-impasto. I'm going to pull some more of this yellow down here and get that more yellow tone that we see there. So it does take more paint, even though you're working with the wax or any medium that you might choose that creates the impasto effect. Let's go here like this. Let's pull a little bit more of that light in there, there. This way. Let's get it just a little bit. I'm going to rinse the brush now because it's beginning to lose it, so it's beginning to get too mixed up. That's the other thing, either working with several brushes or rinsing the brush when the color really begins to change is another thing to keep in mind when you're working impasto. Let's pull this more yellow color in here, get lots of it on the brush, go over here on this side, add the wax medium, work it in the brush, and then bingo, there we go. And let's go there. Now you begin to really see, the texture, how the texture begins to translate the subject itself. A little bit more here. Let's see, this needs to be darker, and I need to get over there and kind of darken this area right here a little bit more. Darker. And you see, quick strokes, and holding the brush, not hit dead on like this. If that doesn't give to hold the brush in this direction like this, scrapes the paint away. But if you hold the brush a little bit more parallel or at an angle to your surface, it helps deposit the paint and gives you more of that texture. Now let's see what else. Let's get this blended down here, and let's get this blended here. Now I just want to do this. I'm just going to keep this very quick, not as a defined piece, but keep it very quick. I'm going to move. I'll move into the darker color, and I'm using this wonderful Rembrandt Transparent Oxide Red and Ultramarine Blue in order to get that black. Now what I'm going to do here is just simply stroke that. I need the texture added to it, lots of texture, and the more paint you pile up on the brush, the deeper the texture. So as far as the brand of paint goes, almost any brand would work, but you might find that certain brands of paint are thicker than others. For example, the Rembrandt brand of paints, for the most part, are very creamy. And so they they don't build they don't build the texture quite as effectively as some of the others. The Winsor and Newton brand oftentimes will come out a lot stiffer. It's a lot stiffer paint, and therefore is going to give the more thicker impasto texture. And so let's go. We'll just continue to build the shadow area. Now, as I said before, you don't really see the texture in it until you start varying the value. So now I'll go into the white, come over here and pick up just enough of that white to, let's see, that white tends to be, that mixture, where the light's shining there tends to go kind of blue. So let's get some white over here. Let's get that blue, scoop it up like that, let's pull some wax into it, and then stroke it in the direction of the rooster's tail, like that. As I said earlier, this could also be done with a palette knife. In fact, a lot of people who do impasto paintings prefer doing so with the palette knife rather than the brush. So I will, in just a moment, I'll do just a little bit more of the palette knife to show you. That's probably enough of that. I need to do just pull a few more strokes of that of the red in here as it goes up the tail of the rooster. You see how the texture is beginning to really build up there. You get just a little bit more of that light right in here. Give you a little bit more of that texture. That's too light. And go back into the medium here to the wax medium, cold wax medium, and you see it also gets very messy. But a lot of people like the messy part of it. That's redder. Here, here, here. Now let's see here. And I'm going to do just a little more. I think I'm going to move to the palette knife now and show you with palette knife. You can, for doing the impasto, there are a number of palette knives on the market. You'll see them in catalogs. They're all kinds of shapes. And so if you really get into palette knife painting, you may want to explore that. They call them painting knives. Palette knife, painting knife, what difference does it make? But in the long run, like everything else, you'll find that you'll probably use just one to do the job for you. Maybe 1, 2, or 3 that you have on hand. All right, so I'm going to go into the red here. I'm looking right here at the rooster. I'm going to pull a little yellow into that red, and a little bit more right in here. I'm trying to get that tone of what I'm looking at in that vicinity, and I'm going to go right in here into the wax, pull that in like this. You see what a mess it all gets to be. Now let's see if we could take the palette knife and see if I've got pretty much needs to look a little bit darker. Then I can take the palette knife and just stroke it on, allowing the palette knife to move in the direction of the whatever's on the shape itself. Every shape has a built-in direction. Different ways, the way the image is shaped will determine how you move over it. And so let's see here. You can give it a little bit more texture by doing this sort of number to it, where you just kind of struck it with the end. Give us a little bit more light right in here. Kind of stroke it down. Let's give it a little bit more dark right in here. Right in here. Let's build a little bit more light. So you see, as you go, you build pretty much the same pattern of doing painting with a brush, or doing painting that's not impasto painting. As you move along, you build the texture as you go. Now sometimes if the value starts going south on you like that did right in there, the value really began to go south, well, you just go right over it. Just adjust the value of the thing and go right over it. So what I'm trying to do there is to get a bit, there we go. And so I've got plenty of wax medium in there, and I get a lighter value, and need to get that value lighter still, and so on. That now you can see if I put a stroke right here, a lighter light right there shows the texture even more. Okay, if you found the Impasto quick tip helpful, and if you have something that you would like me to address, leave a comment right down here, and we'll be happy to take a look at it. And don't forget to check out our videos at diamondmines.com. 170 video lessons to choose from. And there's your quick tip.